Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a terrifying logistical hypothetical. What actually happens to the U.S. healthcare supply chain if border customs just vanish? Completely overnight. Seriously, imagine waking up tomorrow and every single customs officer, tariff collector, and border inspector is simply gone. Poof. Without them, the physical borders essentially transform into wide-open corridors. I know, it sounds exactly like the setup for a dystopian sci-fi novel, right? But mapping out this scenario shows us exactly how our modern world actually holds itself together.
And the numbers brilliantly illustrate our baseline vulnerability. Think about this for a second. Before day one of this scenario even kicks off, the US healthcare system is already operating on a razor-thin margin of safety. I mean, we're talking about roughly 78% of all active pharmaceutical ingredients and nearly half of all medical devices coming from overseas. Our entire medical system is just heavily dependent on this nonstop global flow.
So we're going to track this cascading failure across a 30-day tick-in clock just to see exactly how fast things unravel. Because if customs enforcement vanished instantly, this fragile pipeline wouldn't just slowly leak. No, it would be a catastrophic multi-phase collision. Let's break it down.
Phase 1, days 1 to 3, the standstill.
Almost immediately, the entire global supply pipeline just paralyzes. This is the initial shock phase. Major carriers, think Maersk, FedEx, DHL, they completely freeze their shipments. Why? Well, without legal entry, their cargo insurance policies are instantly voided. No customs officers to process the paperwork means massive legal liability for them. So containers just sit locked on the docks. At the same time, hospital automated procurement systems instantly detect this inbound freeze, and down on the street level, picture your local neighborhood pharmacy. News of this gridlock gets out, and it triggers a massive consumer panic. We're talking shelves stripped completely bare of maintenance meds, stuff like blood pressure pills and insulin in literally 48 hours. Moving into phase 2, days 4 to 10, triage and the 7-day wall. Now, what's absolutely wild about this phase is how the marvel of modern logistics suddenly becomes our biggest fatal flaw. See, modern health systems rely on just-in-time delivery to keep their storage costs down. They typically only keep about 3 to 7 days of essential physical inventory on hand. So by day 7, hospitals hit an absolute brick wall. Nationwide shortages hit hard. We run out of 0.9% normal saline IV bags, sterile sutures, blood thinners, anesthesia, you name it. Hospitals are forced into extreme clinical triage. Elective surgeries are canceled indefinitely just to preserve sterile drapes. And all of this is happening while desperately needed, highly perishable biologics are just sitting there expiring in unmonitored shipping containers at the port. Which brings us to phase 3, days 11 to 20, the gray market surge. Heading into the second week, this situation degrades into a totally unregulated, hazardous free-for-all. Desperation really sets in. Hospital networks stop waiting for the federal government to fix things. Instead, they actually start hiring private security firms, basically mercenaries, to forcibly extract their stalled pharmaceutical containers directly from the ports. This totally bypasses FDA quality assurance. With zero border enforcement, unregulated brokers suddenly flood the market with unverified drugs, marking them up by 500 to 1,000%. And because these batches aren't being chemically verified anymore, hospitals start seeing these horrific, inexplicable bloodstream infections from contaminated IV fluids and counterfeit antibiotics. And then, phase 4, days 21 to 30, institutional collapse. By week 3, the modern American healthcare system literally fractures into two completely different realities. It's a stark two-tier divide. On one hand, you have the wealthy, well-funded academic medical centers. They manage to secure direct, privately guarded air freight pipelines from overseas, and they stand up their own in-house chemical testing labs to verify that the drugs are safe. But on the other side, safety net and rural hospitals. They can't afford private freight or those insane gray market prices, so they literally just run out of basic sterile equipment. We're talking closing down ERs or reverting to 19th century observational triage. The panic gets so localized and intense that governors in major port states actually deploy the National Guard to seize medical cargo. Interstate medical trade completely breaks down. States start embargoing critical medical supplies, refusing to let them leave their borders so they can protect their own citizens. The whole federal system just shatters into localized survivalism. Now, let's look at breaking the cold shoulder. To really grasp why this medical supply line collapses so incredibly fast and lethally, we have to zoom all the way in.
down from the giant oceanic freighters to the microscopic breakdown of biological proteins. Unlike a standard chemical pill, drugs like insulin and modern biologics are complex, super fragile proteins. Over 75% of insulin and almost all modern monoclonal antibodies have to be kept strictly within a tiny fragile thermal window, exactly 2 to 8 degrees Celsius. If they leave that window, total disaster. When border logistics turn into unregulated chaos, these specific drugs face two lethal hazards. First up is the denaturing tipping point. If that cargo sits on a hot dock and gets above 8 degrees Celsius, those intricate 3D protein structures actually unravel. They fold incorrectly. And once a drug is denatured, a patient's immune system will treat it like a hostile invader and launch a massive systemic attack against it. On the flip side, we have the freezing hazard. Say amateur smugglers try to keep things cold using dry ice, and the drug drops below zero. Ice crystals form, physically shearing the protein molecules and permanently destroying them. And the absolute scariest part? A thawed, ruined vial of insulin looks completely clear and perfectly normal to the naked eye. All of this leads to a catastrophic 72-hour failure. Without customs processing to legally clear them, those high-tech insulated shipping boxes expire sitting on airport tarmacs in about 4 days. Out on the water, active refrigerated ocean containers, they call them reefers, just stack up at the terminals. Within days, their auxiliary diesel generators run completely out of fuel. In just 72 hours, multi-million-dollar shipments of life-saving therapeutics literally turn into toxic waste. Which leads to our next section, desperate alternatives. With formal pharmacies empty and the verified supplies completely ruined, patients are forced into terrifying, high-risk choices just to survive. Diabetics, for example, have to adopt incredibly aggressive tactics. Some would hunt down older, harsher legacy human insulins, which carry a dramatically higher risk of sudden, fatal blood glucose swings. Others might play thermal Russian roulette on the black market, risking immediate diabetic ketoacidosis by injecting a vial that might have been secretly ruined by heat or freezing during transport. And to stretch whatever dwindling stockpiles they have left, patients would adopt extremely strict ketogenic diets, basically starving themselves of carbohydrates, just to minimize the amount of mealtime insulin they need. The data across different drug classes paints an incredibly stark picture of a collapsed supply chain. When the formal biologic pipeline falls apart, patients taking specialized monoclonal antibodies for autoimmune disorders can't just switch to a generic pill. They have to fall back on older, harsh chemicals like high-dose corticosteroids. And those come with devastating side effects: rapid bone loss, total immune suppression, you name it. And for those cutting-edge cell and gene therapies, if their cryogenic storage fails, there is absolutely no alternative. The treatment just ceases entirely. So, it leaves us with this final provocative thought to wrap up this explainer. We rightly spend a lot of time focusing on the brilliance of modern doctors, advanced facilities, and cutting-edge science. But is it actually the boring, completely invisible bureaucracy of border regulation and customs enforcement that is quietly keeping modern society alive? Really makes you look at a simple shipping container a whole lot differently, doesn't it?